Novel transcript of The Adventures of Larson and Garrett series by Aaron Dennis. The older boy's jaw clenched a few times, same as their dad did when he didn't want to reveal something that might upset them. But then Largo's demeanor relaxed and he smiled. Don't worry about it. The next 2 days went by pretty quickly in Flotsam, at least for Larson. Waking early for school made him tired early, so apart from Mrs. Graham's lessons and being forced to relive them at his brother's request, nothing happened. Oddly enough, their dad had still not returned. Late that evening, while Larson was upstairs washing himself out of a bucket with a clean cloth, someone pounded on the door downstairs. Freezing on the spot to listen, Larson heard his brother answering the door. "Yes?" Largo asked. "Where's your da?" the man's gravelly voice demanded. "Half mine on business," Largo replied. "Why?" There was silence for a moment, and Larson capitalized. He slunk to the stairs and peeked. Whoever was at the door was blocked by Largo, and the boy wasn't able to distinguish any features. Besides, it was dark, and only 3 candles illuminated the common area. "There's some strange happenings going on," the man said. "I need to speak with your da." "Well, I told you, he ain't here." They grew silent again, and Larson skulked down some steps, but one creaked and Largo turned. He winced at Larson, then gave a barely perceptible gesture with his head, an order to go back upstairs. Larson frowned and sat down instead. "Children been disappearing," the man said. "What's that got to do with that?" "Don't be glib, boy." The man grunted, then checked himself. "Sorry, but we both know your da's a retired soldier. He ain't some half-drunk farmer like the rest of us here, born and bred in Flotsam." That bit of news made Larson jump, and he stood, making the stairs squeak again, and once more Largo turned, except that time he snapped his fingers at his brother. "Go upstairs, boy." Larson grumbled, and since his brother didn't turn away, he had no other alternative and went just far up enough to hear without being seen. "All right," Largo conceded, "let's talk outside." Larson heard the door shut and no more voices. He figured the two were speaking outside, so he snuck all the way to the window and pressed his ears against the shutters. "Your dad teach you the sword, right?" the man asked. Suddenly Larson recognized the voice. It was Mr. Thatcher from town. He was an old man whose son had died years back, even before Larson was born. "Yes," Largo answered, "but I'm not about to go out and hunt whoever's taken children. I got my brother to worry over here." "Well, that's why I'm here, but, Thatcher trailed off. "Look, if you're worried about this, put the word out. There ain't so many people in town that's bringing this to light. Don't solve the problem." "Well, that's just it," Thatcher said. "I don't think it's any of us." "Who'd it be then?" "I don't know. Word is these kids wandered in the forest and vanished. Hunters gathered at Fletcher's yesterday even went out as a party, but they didn't find nothing." "You want Da to lend a hand?" Largo cried. "Aye, but you could in his stead." "No, I couldn't," Largo replied. "Sorry." With that, Largo came back inside. There wasn't any place for Larson to hide, so he just stood there, leaned against the shutter with his mouth open, staring at his brother. "I told you to go upstairs," Largo chastised. "You could go on an adventure like George the Dragon Slayer." "Don't," Largo chuckled. "Don't be stupid. That old painting's still up in the old woman Graham's schoolhouse, isn't it?" "I guess," Larson shrugged. "There's no dragons and no monsters anymore. They went out with the coming of the Third Age." "Then maybe it's a band of goblins or orcs or ogres looking to eat young boys," Larson cheered. "And what, you're happy about that?" "Well, no, I mean..." Larson trailed off and looked at the floor. "Put your clothes on and go to bed," Largo smiled. "When's Dad coming home?" "Go to bed," Largo replied, sternly. Sleeping was the last thing on Larson's mind, and he would have snuck out to go on his own adventure if Largo didn't sleep in the same room. Eventually, after wild fantasies of him, his brother, and Dad fighting off scores of monsters, he fell asleep and dreamt about a tree. It was an odd tree, old and twisted and big. There were no leaves on it, and the trunk was dark gray, almost black as charcoal. The tree had a face like an old man, and its 2 long limbs were bent, like it had elbows. The thing suddenly lurched right out of the ground, and Larson felt as though he'd been scooped up. But then he was awake. Get up for school, Largo yelled. Today's the last day, and then you get 2 off to be lazy. Larson looked at his brother. It was the first time he wasn't angry at being awakened. I dreamt of a tree, Larson said. Exciting, Largo replied sardonically. It was trying to eat me, I think, but you woke me up. Largo looked at his brother. His long hair was disheveled, but he looked happy or relieved to be awake. Glad I could be of service. Now get yourself ready. Largo insisted again on bringing the boy to school. Larson argued, but his brother's mind had been made up. Upon reaching the schoolhouse, the boy saw the parents had all brought their kids, at least the parents of the younger children. Inside, he sat down at his table with his books and looked around. Everyone, Mrs. Graham, the older kids, and the younger ones, all looked nervous. Larson noted some kids were late. Class started, but they never showed. Larson was too preoccupied with the possibility of an adventure to pay attention in school, and likewise, everyone there seemed too preoccupied to care that no one was paying attention. Twice Mrs. Graham lost her place in her lectures. An older boy, Michael, had to step in. Before the day ended, when it was time for questions, Larson stood. What's happening to the missing kids? The room grew silent. Mrs. Graham's smile flickered. That's not for young boys to worry over, Larson. Go home, everyone, and study your books, she said nervously. Larson frowned. When he left the building, he saw all the parents were there waiting for their kids, but his brother wasn't there, so Larson went to Mr. Thatcher's house. He was on the way home anyway. He knocked on the door, and old Mr. Thatcher answered. He was wearing a leather tunic that hung on his time-worn body. White whiskers grew over his upper lip, and his short but scruffy beard gave the look of someone with very little patience. You're Matthew's boy, the little one. He smiled a gap-toothed grin. Larson. Right, Thatcher breathed. What are you doing here? You told my brother kids were disappearing, and you said my dad was a soldier. Thatcher rubbed the white scruff on his chin and looked off towards the tributary. You should go home, finally said. It ain't safe no more. They stared at each other for a moment. Then Thatcher figured it best to walk Larson home since Largo wasn't around. Strolling past the sparse, thin pines out of town, east of the farms, Larson and Thatcher looked at the crops. Corn, beans, and greens were coming in nicely. Then Thatcher left the boy at his door. As the old man turned to leave, he looked over his shoulder and spoke. Keep your wits about you. Larson watched the old man amble off. It was the disjointed gait of a man in refusal of his old age. He finally disappeared behind rows of corn. The boy went inside, ate, got cleaned up, and waited around for Largo, who showed up just after the sunset. Where have you been? Larson accosted him. Out, Largo answered, and tossed a short sword, still in its sheath, onto the table with a clamor. Larson had only seen that sword once. He looked at it, and then at his brother. You went out to look for the kids, Larson said in surprise. Largo winced and vacillated before replying. Yes, but there ain't nothing out there. Everyone's scared. Thatcher even walked me home. I should have been there for you. It won't happen again, Largo sighed. Don't be silly, Larson howled. These people are farmers, not soldiers like Dad. You know how to fight, don't you? Don't worry about that. Besides, they got hunters in town. Those fellas can track better than I can. What are they tracking? Largo remained silent. He looked his brother over for a moment and then grabbed something to eat and a bottle of wine. You're not supposed to drink that, Larson sniffed. Well, Tha's not here to say so, so shut up, Largo joked. He's not coming home, is he? Larson whispered and looked at the sword. Sure he is. He's just held up or something. You know something. No, Largo sighed, and that's what bothers me. Can we go to Half Pine tomorrow? And we'll look after the house. They both grew quiet. Hours went by. Larson had never seen his brother so impassive. There was a look on his face he'd never before witnessed. It was like confusion and determination. Once Larson started to nod off, a knock on the door rallied his attention. Even Largo jumped. He then hopped off nimbly to answer the door. Larson trotted behind. Go upstairs. Ugh, who am I kidding? Largo said and opened the door. It was Thatcher again. What is it? The old man came in and everyone sat down at the table. Another child gone missing, the old man started with a trembling voice. The Geddes girl. Her older brother saw her wander off towards the woods to the north. He ran in after her, but couldn't find her. Thatcher grew quiet and fought to hold back tears. This ain't normal. Vanishing kids is never normal, Largo corrected. I mean, these kids ain't being taken. They're wandering off on purpose. Anyone find anything? No, but they're talking about gathering everyone at the schoolhouse with Mrs. Graham and a few townsfolk keeping guard over the children. I volunteered to help at the end. What's the plan? Largo asked. Thatcher sighed and rubbed his scruff before saying, while the children are kept together and safe, the hunters are going to go out and track the girl. They won't come back until they find something. And you want me to go with them? Largo said, more than asked. Thatcher's gaze pierced Largo's eyes. People need you. Children need you. At the rate we're going, whatever's out there is going to destroy this town. Whatever's out there, Largo howled argumentatively. There's no more monsters, damn it. Who are you to make that call? Largo was stunned, but there can't be. Well, this ain't men or orcs or dwarves, is it? Someone's luring these kids away into the forest, and short of burning it down to the ground, we don't know what else to do. Strangely enough, whoever this is don't seem to pose a threat to adults, so you should be safe. You gotta go, Larson interrupted. Dad would go. Largo clenched his jaw a few times. Larson cocked an eyebrow. I'll get my books, you get your sword, and we'll go to the schoolhouse, Larson stated. At that moment, the boy looked just like their dad. Largo smiled involuntarily. Larson's jaw was smaller, and he was a pint-sized duckling, but the eyes were the same, fierce, with purpose, even though it wasn't him going out to fight. Dad says when people ask you for help, you gotta do it, because one day you or someone you love will need help, and you'll wish everyone would get together to help you, Larson said. Largo turned back to Thatcher and nodded. All right. The three readied themselves, and in the middle of the night they marched to the schoolhouse. Even before arriving, they noticed the light shining through the school's windows. Several people were gathered just inside. Some bore torches. Go inside, Largo told Larson. The boy maintained a stiff upper lip and passed the adults. Within the school's walls, Larson saw the multitude of children. There were almost 24, ranging in ages from infants to perhaps 13. The oldest child who had disappeared was only 9, but no one wanted to take any chances, so everyone old enough to grab a sword, dagger, axe, or bow claimed a weapon and journeyed into the forest. Larson, a boy called. Michael, one of the older boys in Mrs. Graham's class, was sitting at the tables. Larson joined him. They glanced at the other kids and the few older adults and women. Some of the women had apparently joined the hunting party, leaving only 6 adults in the schoolhouse, including Mrs. Graham. Don't be scared, Michael finally said. Not, Larson whispered. I want to help. When you're older, Michael smiled. Michael was slender with long dark hair. His clothes looked like they belonged to someone else, but he was firm and nice. All right, children, Mrs. Graham announced. There's no reason to fret. To keep our minds busy, we'll go ahead and start on Monday's lesson plan. Groans followed suit. She then instructed those who had their books to open to a certain page. Most of the children had to share, as they had come unprepared. It didn't really matter. While Mrs. Graham haphazardly started teaching, most of the boys tried to listen to the other adults. They were speculating about goblins and orcs or ogres, the common child-eating monsters. Someone suggested it was a troll because they only hunt at night. Sunlight turns them to stone, an old man said. But it don't turn them to stone, Mr. Thatcher argued. That's an old wives' tale. Before long, since it was getting late, or early, some of the children placed their heads on folded arms and drifted off. The slow progression of time was grueling. Larson was antsy, but he was also tired. He rifled through the pages of a large book with a green leather cover. He couldn't quite make out the title. Leon's Triumph, he asked himself. Leon's Triumph, Mrs. Graham corrected in a whisper. Larson looked up at her, and she smiled, providing that safe feeling. It's about a brave knight who defeated an army of the undead for his king. Undead? Larson asked. Like skeletons? Like skeletons, Mrs. Graham acknowledged. Can you read it to us? She smiled again and nodded.